Hey there, everybody. I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line. Joining me today is my beautiful partner, Torie. She's here for another episode of Torie Talks.
Yay!
Talk to me, Torie. What are we talking about?
Today we're talking about "We Will No Longer Have to Cover Each Other's Wounds" by Siyuan Wen.
Siyuan Wen? Yeah, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And this is a book, I don't even know. This is from Field Mouse Press, so I must have ordered this on one of their Kickstarter campaigns. This is one I read a long time ago and then gave it to you to read, and then you read it, and we both reread it a couple times,
Yeah.
but they keep being far enough apart that we finally synced up to where we both read it recently. But I've had this for a while. This is from Field Mouse Press, so I probably ordered that on a Kickstarter campaign because Field Mouse does a lot of good stuff. So I would imagine that I probably backed this on Kickstarter. This is a really lovely, I think, kind of poetic, soft, foggy kind of story that's about the feeling of going through loss, I think is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I do think that's a good way to describe it. Is like the haziness of grief and sorrow. I think it captures that sense where everything feels a little blurry and indistinct, but you still know what's going on, and that's kind of how it feels when you're really in the depth of grief. Is things just feel sort of fake and foggy and at a distance. And
yeah, almost to the point that at first I thought this was a series of short stories that are disconnected, and then the longer I spent with it, the more I realized that it is all about this character, Wade, who you're seeing here, just being lifted up by his mother as a baby, while you get him as an adult playing piano. You have this really beautiful, where they reverse the image, so you have the vision of where his mom used to be while he was practicing piano as a child, probably.
No, she's standing over his crib. This is him.
Yeah.
In the current day playing the piano, and this is her standing over his crib speaking to him.
And this is such a beautiful moment here with him playing the keys, and then her hand being reiterated down here in the half tone, grabbing him and just continuing to see those poses. So really, I mean, intense, short intro, but packs in a lot of how important their relationship is. And both in the art, you can kind of see what we mean about foggy, and then in the approach to how you link the panels together, kind of takes some more stitching together on the audience's part. It's a little more interactive.
Yeah, it's a little more dreamlike, a little more interpretive. So.
And then that exists between the chapters too. I could probably read this book 5 times and have 5 different. Even though I know the general thing is it's about Wade's mom died and he's dealing with that. I would take very, very different things, I think, each time.
Yeah, it was kind of nice having to reread it a few times, even though we kept missing each other and being oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Because it did let me unlock more of it.
And another thing that really drew me to the art in this, it's mostly done with what looks like really dark pencils, like ebony pencils or something, is the artist is very good at capturing the kind of what I loved about Mid-Journey art, when we made Abolition of Man, and they had mushy faces and messed up hands and stuff, but it was the images we got for Abolition were so emotionally expressive, and that's kind of washed out. I love this art because it carries all of the raw, expressive emotive power of someone like a Kathy Kolowitz, or that quality that was in the early AI. But it's a human artist, so it can be imbued with meaning. The character can look the same. The hands are right. It really brings together the best of an artist who really can just let themselves draw expressively. It's really beautiful to look at. And the other thing that I think makes this book really powerful visually, is that it's both very graphic in terms of having these like high contrast silhouette based type of images everywhere. But then there's also a lot going on that's very like representational and suggestive of like atmosphere and stuff. Like you wouldn't normally have something that looks like a stamp icon logo that also has the blur and the smudge and kind of that
Yeah.
sense of realism.
That's true. I guess I didn't think about that.
And like even having this thing spinning above him in his crib, it's like realistic and has motion, but it's also just looks like a graphic device, like a clock.
Yeah. This book is just so sad. That's the only thing about it is it's so sad. So she's, well, it shows she's got a brain scan. I kind of interpreted it as it seems like she has some kind of dementia or something. I don't know, but it shows that she's gotten some kind of procedure. And then you had marked this as like with a note about the weight of the family tree. But to me, what this seemed like was also like when knowing what we know about like the brain that's being destroyed by Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and stuff, it's like the overgrowth of these plaques and things. Like, so I'm seeing like not just a tree, but these neurons,
like the mother's mind being eaten
like
by
her brain
these.
actually growing into a monstrous thing that's like destroying both of their lives.
Yeah, and I just saw it like I don't. What obviously always when I hand you books, it's because it's the experiences that we've gone through together.
Yeah.
I think it relates to.
Yeah.
So it's probably kind of cruel because it's always shitty stuff like the death of your mother. But like when I saw this and he's like thinking about his mom and the religious stuff, and I do think some of the like foggy nature of how the book is constructed is speaking to her having Alzheimer's. And like my grandmother died from Alzheimer's. Your mom died from a form of dementia. So like I've seen multiple people deal with it. It's been in my family, and it does always. I think any death in the family, especially something like that, where you maybe have to be a caretaker for a parent or a long time, the weight of the family tree becomes much more apparent. You know, like I mean, I first met like your entire family in that situation, and there was all kinds of crazy family things going on at that time. So I was like linking those two things together. That as the one thing takes over, this other, because he gets kind of a, and also like as a caretaker, like watching my mom do it, and then like having to become a caretaker for you, like you are in danger of also like this disease that's eating this other person, like they could eat you, eat up your life. And we've had to find that balance of like, how do I still live my life but make sure that you're being attended to and taken care of, and you know, not left bored, you know. So I think that's just a very powerful 6 pictures in a row there.
Yeah, I mean it is. And just like the way that watching someone that you love, they obviously have a a deep emotional relationship with each other, and it's like watching that person you love grow ill and like die. That's the other thing, is like that monstrous like uncontrolled growth. It's like they just become so much more. There's so much more that gets layered onto this person that was just someone you loved. Like, yeah, I think it's just a really powerful depiction of that feeling of like observing someone you care for.
And it's like so general that me and you are being able to map like 6 different things, but it's also so specific that they're all in the same area, which is always one of the things I tell my students, like about artist statements and things. When I'm asking them why, I don't need like a specific explanation. I just need you to get me into the right yard, and as long as I'm anywhere in that yard, then you're doing pretty good. And I feel like this is getting us into a very specific yard, and then allowing just enough wiggle room for very deep personal interpretation to be put on top of it.
Yeah, it's very well done. I did think this was kind of odd, the parts that were just randomly colored.
Yeah, it was strange, but I was trying to make sense of what that is, and this is after she left, so I think this is her dying there. Like this is where she dies,
Yeah.
and then he goes home. This is called After She Left, and what I took away from it is he's like coming to her house, and this is probably where he grew up, or somewhere he spent a lot of time. And to me, the color represented the familiarity of it. That it's like a picture he knows more about how to fill in, versus these situations are more of metaphorical, or like he's sitting in a chair in a doctor's office. It's not a chair he knows,
Yeah.
it's just a symbol of a chair. So I think that awareness that I was talking about between like the symbolic
Okay.
and the more representational, because like everything's less symbolic here too.
Yeah, and that was a part that kind of threw me when it was like these. Yeah, they're more detailed, they're more colored. Like it was just very strange to me. They're very nice. I mean, it was like really nice to look at. I like the use of the like soft colors, and it does create like a warmth and a personal feeling. But it was weird against all this kind of like black and white, soft, smudgy stuff that reminded me of like the fountain and things like that. But
Yeah, and it's like jarring, but I think it's also meant to be jarring. Like your mom just died and you haven't been to her apartment, and now you're opening it
yeah,
up. Like
yeah,
I,
that makes
I
sense.
think there's a lot of reasons to make that choice that were subtle, but it was jarring. And you can see this artist working in totally different modes, so you know how
Yeah.
powerful they are. Hey! Cammy! Bucha! Go lay down.
Go lay down.
And then beautiful composition here, and like some really awesome more Asian influenced brush work with the tones and the ink wash.
Yeah. Oh, and I thought this was such a beautiful statement. He's talking about this moth that has spots on its wings that mimic the face of a Persian tiger, but the Persian tiger is now extinct. Has been for like 30 years. So this now is a biological, he calls it a biological coffin portrait.
So it's like a portrait painted in nature.
Yeah, it says a mask of death sculpted by nature.
That's pretty cool.
Because it's mimicking a thing that no longer exists.
I didn't like catch that train of thought. Yeah, that's a fascinating idea.
So, yeah, and I thought that was such a beautiful idea about like death and how nature deals with death and things like that.
Like the tiger is extinct, but it lives on.
Yeah, it's living on through this creature that like used it's still protecting. Not only is it being remembered, it's still protecting that moth.
Yeah, because it's a defense mechanism that it evolved. Yeah, that's a really interesting
and I
idea.
thought that was such a beautiful concept. And we talk about like I'm really into death and like death practices and stuff, and coffin portraits and things like that were pretty common in Victorian time. They'd prop up dead bodies and dress them up, and they would look very lifelike and stuff like that. But those were often the only photos that they ever got taken of them.
Yeah.
So it was just interesting that concept is being connected to this evolutionary mechanism. And I thought that was such a beautiful idea.
That is fascinating. Yeah, I'm glad you put a note there, because I totally missed that part. That is a totally fascinating idea.
Yeah.
And then just in terms of art and composition, really cool set of pages. And again, you can see the artist working between many like modes of realistic to abstraction and iconic, which I think when you're explaining scientific ideas like that, or like here, it's just talking about how we deal with bodies from an imaging standpoint. I think it's really appropriate that you do that when you're assessing something scientifically. You're choosing a level of abstraction, and everything else gets. I mean, we've watched you go through this so many times, is that they're looking so specific at this one exact area because that's what insurance will pay for. and everything else about your case, including the testimony of like when you got it and what we've gone through, that all just gets abstracted out, and this is how they're viewing, and they're showing that there, this is just this body we're hooking things up to, and you're.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing was so personally brutal for me because it's like it's hard not to feel like this is how I feel about my body. It's just this medical thing now that's just constantly being poked and prodded, and we joke and giggle like they've scanned every part of me, but like they've looked at every part of me. Like I have no privacy.
Well, and it's generated so much data with no answers that all it's doing is been generating this noise, and then they're looking at like this noise and putting it as like you're just a collection of this noise that has led to like no answer yet.
Well, but also like the oblivion of like television. Like there's many days where all I can do is just lay on the couch, and he's saying, for an incurable disease with no physical traces to be found, oblivion is your only medicine. And it's like you just you just find any way to pass the time because like you feel your humanity is being broken apart, and you're just becoming like scans and just I don't know, like
no,
you're being disintegrated into data.
Yeah, and like sometimes you can't even, like the worst days, weeks we have are the weeks where you can't even watch TV or something. Like you do just enter oblivion. Like that's how you feel like.
Yeah, and it's such a strange place. And these were just such powerful comparisons because it's like these are what my doctors are seeing, but this is what I'm feeling every day.
And this is like your reality at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just have to sit there and watch. I have to watch you deal with this, be treated like this, knowing that they're thinking about you like that. And they don't listen to me when I tell them.
Yeah.
And they don't listen to you when we tell them what's going on here.
Yeah.
So I think it shows really clearly, too, like the kind of three different ways the data gets reported to the doctor.
It was definitely a super, I mean, that's, I think, one of the most powerful 2 pages in the whole book as far as like the experience of illness.
Yeah. And then this page is about like this thing that you've dealt with your whole life because they can't figure out what's wrong. So they just say everything's fine, like, and it just talks about just like magnetic fields, radiation, or ghosts, whatever's going on with his mother is simply invisible because I think it is Alzheimer's or whatever. Up until today, we still do not know what is passing through your body or how it sought me out. And like there he's talking about, I don't know what kind of genetic thing I might be set up for, which is something we have to worry about with your mom. And I just think this is another one of those.
And also if you think about like epigenetics on top of this, how we know how environment can turn on or off genetic risk factors for disease or not, it's just this too was also just another one of those things. Everything's fine. It's like I say that everything's fine when it's not fine. They say that to me, everything's fine when it's not fine. Like
and again visually dense in that like the magnetic fields, the radiation from the plant, the telephone wires, there are these unseen forces that we are exposed to that do cause illness. And we know that, like, historically, there's been plenty of cases where towns have all gotten sick and they've caught whatever factors. So that they're wrapping all of that in and showing, like, the entire system on top of the personal experience is pretty powerful composition and storytelling.
Yeah, it's a brutal read. I mean, it's beautiful, but it just, it was tough. That for me was just, I mean, this is one of those things where I feel like I'm always, just like sharing really gloomy personal details, but this for me was just a really personally powerful page because there also was no funeral when my mom died.
Yeah.
We never will have a funeral for her.
But you did have like a meaning-making moment at your brother's house.
I mean, artificially engineered by someone else. But, like we never went through the ritual of saying goodbye to my mom. And I think I regret that, but it's just the circumstances made that what it was. But, like, it was in the middle of 2020, pandemic.
Yeah.
Family had to go back. We had been with her for two weeks, I think, at the time already. Caring for her while she died, so like everybody had to go back home. Like it just was what it was. But
well, I think it was a week because I was there for a week.
I guess it was
but then
like a week.
Stephen had been there for a week ahead, and it was just.
But anyway, so that just for me was like, and it was just such a simple sentence, but it's like, wow, that just means. It can mean so many things for different people, right? Like some people it's like, well, fuck that bitch. We didn't have a funeral for her, but like it can also mean like we didn't get
to do it.
Like, again, I circle back to how I used to think ritual was really stupid and like archaic, but actually I think it's really important, and I think that's part of the reason that my family as a whole has really struggled to move past her dying.
Well, and I think you all, like, you were in that mindset, and I would have been that, like, because that's a conclusion we've come to together. But I would have been like ritual dumb, da 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 da.
Yeah, because at the time we were like, we didn't want to, we didn't need to, we were all exhausted. We were just like, it doesn't mean anything. But actually, I think it does. I think it does mean something.
You think it would have, and
I think it would have.
You should have,
and we should have, and I regret not doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. The photograph was replacing her face, freezing her face in memory.
Oh yeah. So on these 2 pages, he's talking about the photograph he found to use for her funeral, or like her obituary or tombstone or whatever. So he found this photo of her to use after she died for her obit or something, and he's saying that photo has now like replaced her into this calm, nameless, like familiarity of her. And it's like, I get that weird sense too. It's actually part of the reason I've taken a lot of the pictures of my mom down a lot lately, is because it's a weird feeling to see that, and it's like, it's obviously her, but it's not anymore.
Yeah, it's like a frozen, it has no life in it, so it's like an icon of the person, like a frozen image of them.
Yeah, and so it feels familiar. It's like it makes you feel memory of mom, but then it's like, but it's not really like her, and it's never gonna move or change again, so it's not alive. And it's I just thought that was interesting how he like talks about that photo like replacing her, and that's kind of how I felt. So I actually kind of like just unconsciously felt that, and that was part of the reason I like didn't want to have so many pictures of her around.
Well, and he's got this thing too where she's like watching him, so still judging him, and I think we've gone through that, like like the way that expectations of what your parents hoped for you can live in your mind beyond their death. And then he says, she has never gazed at me for so long. And then in this moment is showing her face erasing, and then has showed his. So like that mimics to me a lot of what I've seen you go through, where like your ability to start to find your real self couldn't kick in until your mom was gone, and like you start to, her face fades into that more icon instead of this active voice in your head. So I think, again, another page where it's And like just something as simple as like putting the eyes here and just having these two eyeless faces is tangibly uncomfortable to look at. The living are the abyss, the dead are the sun.
Oh yeah, so he's talking about that portrait still and how he would like stare at it, and then he put a mirror next to it so that when he couldn't stare at her anymore, he would stare at himself. And he was saying, "The living are the abyss, and the dead are the sun." And he's saying the former dangerously draws all eyes to it, but the latter makes it difficult to look too long. And so he's saying now that she's dead, she can sit there and gaze out at him with no guilt, with no shame. Like,
Yeah.
all he can do is just look away. And it's like, I've said that so many times. It's so unfair that mom gets to win all the arguments, right? It's like she went off and died, and now she doesn't, you know?
Yeah, you can't ask the question.
Yeah, you can't finish the conversation and things like that.
But like the voice in the head that's telling you you're doing it wrong or whatever is still there,
Yeah.
but you can't talk to it the same.
Yeah, and it's strange how like when they're alive, you're drawn, like my mom was this, you know, I mean, you know, she was a huge, important, all-encompassing figure in me from ways I didn't even understand. And then after she's gone, it's like, it's hard for me, even though I miss her so much, it's hard for me to even gaze at her for a minute. So, but I just thought that was, which is distracting me.
Yeah, look at that face. Booch, go lay down.
I don't know. Anyways, yeah. I'll edit that. Now we're back to this weird color stuff.
I really liked this image here because we're again talking about this idea of a memory after the person's gone, and it says, I wish your grave was empty. There should be only traces, those that you left in the old apartment over the years, the footprints, the dents in the seat, and the finger marks, as if all the evidence of your physical existence could be pieced together into a human-sized void. And I like this idea that all that's left to shape our memories of the person is their stuff, the stories, the memories about them. And then this is referencing famous fine artist Andre Muniz, who will recreate other famous pieces of art, but like he would go to a junkyard and get all the trash and reshape it and then photograph it. This very much looks like an Andre Muniz piece. So I think there's a lot of I think he adds even more meaning by taking this particular visual approach, because he's referencing some stuff that adds more to the idea of this conglomerate of a person.
Well, and I also thought it's like he's talking about the traces and how I put a note here and saying I made tiny tin boxes as tiny morgues for like hairpins and toothbrushes and unused tampons, and it's all this ridiculous. I still have bags full of ridiculous items that belong to my mom that I keep literally because it's precious to me only because it was hers. Like, and any other reason I would have just thrown it away. And it's like, yeah, somehow those things become so meaningful because, yeah, they outline the shape of the person that, and you're like hoping, like, maybe if I can just, like, you know, it'll feel a little bit better. It'll feel a little bit less like they're gone, but, you know.
And the one Andre Muniz piece, maybe we can edit in an example of one. But the Andre Muniz piece that this brings to mind is he has gone to a like landfill and it is all trash.
Yeah.
So I think he's very. My guess is this is a very specific reference to that very specific piece of art or series of works by Andre Muniz, where he's using trash. But there, I think you're right that this artist is using it to say how much of a person is told through their trash, like how much of our identity is wrapped up in that, or people's external perception of our identity potentially,
and like what we're left with, you know, after after you're dead. Like, it's just your crap. Like, we talk about that all the time. Like, Jack's gonna have to deal with all our crap when we're dead. Like,
I'm gonna burn all our books before we die. First off, I just really liked the imagery here. I like these overlap imageries and like the silent voices, basically. But also, just given everything that we've been through over the last 2 years, when memory ceases to exist, wounds become the chronicles of the body. And then, this especially, we were so afraid that they would suddenly open their mouths to talk on behalf of the silent us. And just like this idea of not having the voice and having your body going awry, speaking for you, and like, I don't know, causing presentations in the world, or just what we've dealt with like even trying to get people to listen to what we're actually telling them. I think that's very, especially well represented in this image here. And then at the end of the book, I love that like you come back. I mean, it really does work like a song. I think this is more of like a visual song to me. The whole book, because you do have like the overture at the
You're
beginning.
so right. I wouldn't have thought that until you said it, but as I replayed that back in my head, I'm like, I can totally imagine the way that the sound would shift from chapter to chapter.
Yeah, and these are each like little movements. And I think that
Yeah.
color thing that you're finding strange in certain spots is like the timbre of the movement.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
So yeah, I think this is like half of what we've said about these pages, or at least what I've said about these pages, is occurring to me as we're talking about it.
Yeah, that's how good this is that, like you said, I think we've both reread it 4 or 5 times, and I'm still like, I still don't know everything that I think and feel about it. It's so rich and so powerful.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize that this is like the motif coming back down. You kind of have this opening and closing bookend with the motif, and then I don't know. I'd be curious to go back, like what those other visual rhythms are. I'm sure there's more going on in here than we've talked about, but a very very deep book from Siyuan Wen, and someone that I'm really going to be paying attention to because this is an exceptional piece of work.
Yeah, this made me super sad. It's super, super depressing, but beautiful and worth it.
But the kind of well done depressing.
Yeah. No, I don't mean, I wouldn't read something or recommend something that was depressing just for the sake of it. It's got to be redeeming.
Yeah. So a beautiful book. Please go check it out from Field Mouse Press. House on Fire by Matt Battaglia is a just gorgeous book where Matt's kind of making an emotional response to the years of COVID and wrapping that into a sci-fi dystopian future that really the sci-fi dystopian's backgrounded, and you're focused on the emotional journey of two characters in a really beautiful way. And then that's enhanced by Matt's like really awesome, loose, kind of Paul Popish dry brush work. And then Sean and Matt have worked to get this second kind of orange spot color in there that's going to look really, really beautiful, and has allowed Matt to use his dry brush technique to add tone to the thing too. So with Sean's production technique, this is going to be a gorgeous book with a lot of heart.